There is a number that, for most of your life, was treated as a joke, a punchline on the financial channels, something only a crank or a doomsday preacher would say out loud. And the people who laughed the loudest were the very same people who make their living managing your money. The big banks, the brokerage houses, the polished voices on television who need you calm, invested in their products, and quietly afraid of the one asset they cannot print. But something changed. The joke stopped being funny, and the people who told it went quiet. If you are retired or close to it, with your life savings sitting in a 401k or an IRA, I need you to hear this clearly, because it is about your money and the years you have left to protect it. What I am going to show you is not a prediction and not a promise. It is a mechanism, a lever that has been pulled before in this country, inside the lifetimes of people still living, that took the price of gold and moved it almost overnight. Not because a chart said so, because a government signed a piece of paper. So let me give you the fact that reframes everything right up front. In the middle of the 1930s, the United States government did something most people today have no idea ever happened. It took the official price of gold, which had been fixed for generations at $20.67 an ounce, and it raised it in a single stroke by decree to $35. Not over years, not on a trading floor. It was written into law and imposed on the entire country before most Americans had finished their breakfast. A jump of nearly 70%, decided in Washington, done to the money itself. Here is how it worked, and why it matters to you more than any chart ever will. The year before, Americans were told to bring their gold to the bank, their coins, their bars, handed over in exchange for paper dollars at the old price. Private ownership of monetary gold was, by order, made illegal. Then, once the gold was safely in government hands, the price was revalued upward. The citizens sold low, by law. The authorities marked it up, by law. And the enormous difference between those two prices did not go to the people who had held that gold their whole lives. It went to the government that changed the rules. Picture for a moment an ordinary man in that era, a machinist, a shopkeeper, a farmer who had done everything right. He had saved carefully his whole working life, and some of what he set aside he had put into gold coins, because gold was money, real money, the thing a dollar was supposed to be a claim on. He was told to bring those coins in. He did what he was told, like a good citizen, and he walked out of the bank with paper at the old price. And within the year, that same gold he had surrendered was suddenly worth far more on the government's own books than what he had been paid for it. He had not done anything wrong. He had followed every rule, and he was still on the losing side of a decision made far above his head in a room he was never invited into. That is the quiet danger of trusting that the rules protecting your savings will never change. The people who change them do not ask your permission, and they do not send a warning. This is the thing the big banks do not want you to sit with, because it quietly breaks the frame they sell you. When you watch the financial channels, gold is presented as a line on a graph, a wiggle that goes up and down based on sentiment, on rate expectations, on whether traders feel brave this month. And inside that frame, a very high number sounds insane, because no line climbs that far that fast in an orderly way. But revaluation is not a line. Revaluation is a decision. It does not care about your trend line. It does not climb. It jumps. And it has happened, here in America, by the stroke of a pen, within living memory. Now ask yourself the uncomfortable question. Why would a government ever do such a thing? The answer, then and now, is debt. A country that owes more than it can ever comfortably repay has only a few doors out of the room, and most of them are ugly. It can default, which is unthinkable for the issuer of the world's reserve currency. It can tax its way out, which no politician survives. Or it can quietly change what the money is worth. And gold, sitting in the vaults, is the one thing that gets repriced when it does. When the debt grows large enough, revaluing the gold behind the currency stops being a history lesson and starts becoming a tool on the table. And make no mistake about the scale of what we are carrying now. The debts of the United States and of the wider world are not at ordinary levels. Global debt sits at several times everything the world produces in an entire year. The cost simply to pay the interest on the American debt has climbed to a share of the budget not seen in decades. This is not a talking point from the fringe anymore. It is arithmetic, sitting in plain sight, and the people who run the system understand exactly what it implies. They would just prefer you did not connect the dots yourself, because a debt that large does not simply sit there quietly forever. Eventually, it has to be dealt with, and every honest option on the table involves the value of the dollar itself. That is not fear-mongering. It is the plain math of a balance sheet that no longer adds up, and gold is the one asset on that balance sheet that is allowed to rise when the money is allowed to fall. And here is where it stops being theory, because the biggest, most sophisticated buyers on the planet are already acting on it. The world's central banks, the institutions that sit at the very center of the money system, have been buying gold at a pace we have not seen in generations. For 3 years running, they bought more than 1,000 tons a year, roughly double what they had been buying the decade before. Gold recently overtook the euro to become the second largest reserve asset held by central banks anywhere on Earth, behind only the United States dollar itself. Think about what that means. The people who print the money are trading it for the metal, and they are doing it for a reason that should make every saver in America pay attention. A few years ago, the world watched one major nation have its foreign reserves, money it believed was safely parked abroad, frozen in an instant by the countries that held it. Every other central bank drew the same quiet conclusion. Money held inside someone else's system can be switched off. Gold sitting in your own vault cannot be frozen, cannot be canceled, cannot be reduced to a line of text on a foreign screen. It is the one reserve that answers to no one. And so the buying accelerated, and it has not stopped, even as the price climbed to levels that would have been called impossible not long ago. Notice something about that buying, because it is the tell. These institutions are not waiting for a dip. They are not trying to time the bottom. They are buying near record highs, above levels that would make an ordinary trader hesitate, because they are not thinking like traders at all. They are thinking like insurers. They are not asking what gold does next quarter. They are asking what protects the balance sheet when the whole system gets repriced. That is a completely different question from the one the financial channels want you asking. And it is the right one. Brings me to something you deserve to know, because there is a quiet unfairness built into all of this. The central banks can move a portion of their reserves into physical gold whenever they choose. Most ordinary savers assume they simply cannot do the same thing, not without cashing out, taking the tax hit, and swallowing the penalty. That is not true, and it is one of the least understood corners of the retirement rules. There is a perfectly legal way for an ordinary American to do exactly what the central banks are doing, to move a portion of an existing retirement account into real, physical gold and silver held in your name, without triggering taxes or penalties in the process. It is called a self-directed precious metals IRA, and it is not some club reserved for insiders. If you have $100,000 or more in any 401k or IRA, this is squarely for you. I put together a free guide that walks through exactly how it works. If you are watching this on your television, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to jeffreedguide.com. Then come right back, because the next part is where all of this comes together. Now here is the part that almost nobody on the financial channels will walk you through. And it is the part that actually changes how you should think about that number in the title. Everyone argues about gold the wrong way. They draw the trend. They measure the angle. They tell you how many years it should take to double, as if the market were a train running on a fixed timetable. But that entire argument rests on an assumption. It assumes an orderly market, moving at an orderly pace, under rules that never change. History says otherwise. Go back to what happened in the 30s one more time, because it is the whole key. Nobody watched gold grind from the old price up to the new one over a slow decade of trading. It did not happen on a chart. It happened on a single page of the calendar, in one announcement. The revaluation was an act, not a trend. And that is the honest answer to anyone who tells you a very high gold price is a fantasy. It is only a fantasy if you assume the price has to climb there one orderly step at a time. It does not. When a government finally decides it needs the gold on its books to be worth more, to shore up the currency, to paper over the debt, the repricing does not take years. It takes a signature. There is one more piece of this you need to understand, because it is where a lot of savers get quietly hurt. Most of what trades in the world under the name of gold is not gold at all. It is a paper claim, a promise, an entry on a ledger somewhere that says metal exists and belongs to you. And there are many, many more of those paper claims floating around than there is physical metal sitting in a vault to satisfy them. In ordinary times, that does not matter, because almost nobody asks to actually take delivery. But a A real crisis in confidence is precisely the moment when everyone wants the real thing at once, and the paper turns out to be a promise that cannot be kept for everybody who holds it. When the repricing comes, it is the person holding the actual metal in their own name who is made whole. The person holding the promise finds out what a promise is worth in a stampede. This is why the distinction between owning gold and owning a claim on gold is not a technicality. In the moment that matters most, it is everything. And if you want evidence that the old rules are already bending, look at what gold has been doing lately. For decades, there was an iron law on Wall Street. When real interest rates rose, gold was supposed to fall, because gold pays you nothing, and a bond that pays a real return is the one true enemy of the metal. That relationship has broken. Gold has climbed even while real yields stayed high, something the old models said simply should not happen. When a correlation that held for 40 years quietly stops working, it is usually because something deeper has shifted underneath it. The market is no longer pricing gold as a bet on interest rates. It is starting to price it as an escape from the whole system. And into all of this walks the Federal Reserve, more divided than it has been in a very long time. The Fed's latest decision left policy where it stood, but it exposed a real split inside the committee. Policymakers openly at odds, some pushing to tighten harder against inflation, others wanting to hold and wait. The current chair, Kevin Warsh, has not tried to hide the disagreement. He has almost welcomed it. But here is what a divided central bank tells you as a saver. The people in charge do not agree on the way out. And when the navigators are arguing over the map, that is not the moment to assume the ship stays perfectly level. Uncertainty at the very top is exactly the condition under which the unthinkable tool, a repricing, quietly moves closer to the table. And this is not the only time a fixed promise about gold was defended right up until the instant it was abandoned. There was a period after the war when the great powers pooled their reserves and spent them together to hold the price of gold at that very same $35 line, pouring real metal into the market to keep the number from moving. They swore it would hold. And then, when the cost of defending it grew too great, they simply stopped, walked away, let it go, overnight. A little later, the tie between the dollar and gold was cut entirely, and the price the authorities had insisted was permanent turned out to have been temporary all along. The lesson repeats across every generation. An official price is a policy, and a policy ends the moment it becomes inconvenient to the people who set it. So when someone tells you the number in the title of this video is a joke, understand what they are really saying. They are saying it cannot happen slowly and smoothly on a nice clean chart. And about that narrow point, they may even be right. But that was never how the biggest moves in gold happened. They happened by decree, by devaluation, by a government quietly deciding the money should be worth less and the metal should be worth more. The joke was never the number. The joke was the assumption that the rules protecting today's number will hold forever. And that assumption is exactly what the big banks need you to keep believing. And this is the part one most want you to sit with, because it is the whole reason timing matters. You are early. Right now, the smart money, the central banks, the sovereign funds, the most sophisticated players in the world already understand everything I have just told you, and they are already positioned. The mainstream has not caught on. Your neighbors are not talking about this over dinner. The pension committees and the television anchors are still treating that big number as a punchline. That gap between what the smart money already knows and what the crowd has not yet noticed is the whole opportunity. Because by the time it is obvious, by the time it leads every news segment and every advisor finally recommends it, the easy part will already be behind us. Nobody sends you an invitation to this. Nobody is going to call you and tell you the window is closing. It closes quietly, while everyone is still laughing. Now, let me be as honest with you as I know how to be, because you have earned it by staying this long. I cannot tell you a price, and I will not tell you a date. Gold is volatile. It can fall hard and fast, especially when the trading desks raise the cost of holding it just to shake the nervous loose. Everything I have laid out is a case, a serious evidence-based case, but it is a case, not a guarantee, and none of this is personal financial advice for your particular situation. So think in principles. Own the real thing, the physical metal in your name, not a paper promise that someone else can quietly fail to honor. Size your position so that a sharp drop can never force you to sell at the worst possible moment. And whatever you do, do not panic sell into a shakeout, because being shaken loose at the bottom is precisely how the patient end up owning what the frightened were scared into surrendering. If you have stayed with me all the way to here, you are exactly the person this last part is for. For those of you with $100,000 or more in a retirement account who watched this full video, I am offering a free one-on-one educational web conference, a real conversation about your situation. No obligation, no pressure. Just mention that you watched to the end. And here is the honest reason to do it now rather than later. The time to think clearly about protecting your savings is precisely when nothing feels like an emergency, when the decision is still calm and cheap and entirely reversible, not in the panic after the world has already repriced. If you are watching this on your television, scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to jeffreedguide.com. The number in the title stopped being a joke the moment you understood it was never going to arrive on a chart. It arrives by decision. And the only question that matters is whether you are positioned before that decision is made or hearing about it, like everyone else, only after.